The winter of 1875 came to the Sangre de Cristo Mountains like a predator stalking its prey. Silent, inevitable, merciless. Snow fell in thick curtains that transformed the rugged New Mexico landscape into something both beautiful and deadly. The peaks rose like jagged teeth against a pewter sky, their slopes covered in pines that bent beneath the weight of ice and snow. Wind howled through the canyons, carrying with it the scent of frozen earth and the promise that only the strong would survive until spring. In these mountains, the Apache had lived for generations beyond counting. They knew every canyon, every hidden spring, every secret path that wound through terrain that would kill a white man within hours. They moved through this harsh land like shadows, leaving no trace, taking only what they needed, living in harmony with a world that demanded respect. Nahale stood at the edge of a granite outcropping, his dark eyes scanning the valley below with the focused intensity of a hawk, searching for prey. At 28 winters, he was young to lead a band of warriors, yet no one questioned his authority. His father had been a great war chief, his grandfather before him a legendary warrior, whose name was still spoken with reverence around Apache fires. But among the Apache, leadership was not inherited like the white man's titles. It was earned through courage, through wisdom, through an unwavering commitment to the freedom that defined their people. The cold bit at his exposed skin, but Nahale barely registered the discomfort. From childhood he had trained his body to endure far worse than winter's harsh kiss. His long black hair, braided with strips of leather and adorned with a single eagle feather, hung past his shoulders. His buckskin clothing was reinforced with layers of fur that allowed for movement while providing warmth against temperatures that could freeze a man's breath in his lungs. His face was all sharp angles and strong planes, high cheekbones that spoke of his heritage, a proud nose, a jaw that suggested both strength and determination. His eyes were his most striking feature, dark as obsidian, yet somehow warm, capable of great tenderness or terrible fury, depending on the circumstance. Around him, 15 of his best warriors waited in patient silence, their breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. These were men he trusted with his life, men who had followed him through situations that should have killed them all. They understood that today's mission was not about glory or conquest, it was about survival. Chase, his closest friend since childhood and his most trusted warrior, moved silently to stand beside him. At 30, Chase was slightly older than Nahale, with a scar that ran from his left eyebrow to his jaw, a reminder of a grizzly bear that had nearly killed him 5 years ago. He was stocky and powerful where Nahale was lean and quick, but they complemented each other perfectly in battle and in council. "The herd is moving toward the canyon just as you predicted," Chase said quietly, his words forming small clouds in the cold air. Nahale nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving the valley below. The Ashford Ranch, one of the largest cattle empires in the New Mexico territory, stretched across land that had once been Apache hunting grounds. Thomas Ashford was a man who took what he wanted, who believed that his wealth and influence placed him above all law, all human decency. Over the past 5 years, his cattle had destroyed water sources that the Apache had relied upon for generations. His hired guns had killed 2 of Nahale's people, who had been doing nothing more than hunting deer on land that had belonged to their ancestors long before any white man set foot in this territory. The reservation agents had offered his people moldy flour and rancid beef if they would simply surrender their freedom and live on designated lands. Nahale had watched other bands waste away on those reservations, had seen the light die in their eyes as they were forced to abandon everything that made them Apache. He had chosen a different path, one that meant constant vigilance, endless movement, and the knowledge that every day could be his last. But it was a path of freedom, and freedom was worth any price. "We move when the sun touches the western peaks," Nahale said, his voice carrying quiet authority. "We take only what we need to survive the winter. We harm no one unless they force our hand. Our goal is the cattle and nothing more. Do you understand?" The warriors murmured their agreement. They had heard this instruction before every raid, and they knew Nahale meant it. He was not a man who killed for sport or revenge. He was a man who did what was necessary to keep his people alive, nothing more and nothing less. As the sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, painting the snow in shades of gold and crimson, Nahale felt something shift in the air around him. It was a sensation he had learned never to ignore, a whisper of intuition, a warning from the spirits that this day would be different from all others. His hand moved instinctively to the medicine pouch he wore around his neck, fingers brushing the leather as if seeking reassurance. "Brother?" Chase asked, noticing the gesture. "What troubles you?" "I don't know," Nahale admitted, his eyes still fixed on the distant valley. "But something tells me that after today nothing will be the same." He could not have known how profoundly right that feeling was. Victoria Ashford had never particularly enjoyed the winter social season in Santa Fe, with its endless rounds of balls and parties where eligible young women were paraded like horses at auction. But this year, she found the entire charade utterly unbearable. At 23 years old, she was dangerously close to being labeled a spinster by the standards of territorial society, a fact her father reminded her of with increasing frequency and frustration. The problem was elegantly simple. Victoria had absolutely no interest in becoming any man's ornament, no matter how wealthy or well-connected he might be. She had rejected 5 proposals in the past 2 years, each refusal causing her father's blood pressure to rise a little higher. Thomas Ashford had built his cattle empire from nothing, transforming himself from a penniless immigrant into one of the wealthiest men in the territory through sheer force of will and ruthless business practices. He expected his only daughter to secure their family's position through a strategic marriage to one of the territory's powerful families, preferably the Mitchells, who owned the largest silver mine in the region, or the Harringtons, whose banking interests extended all the way to San Francisco. Instead, Victoria spent her time reading books that her father considered inappropriate for a lady, works of philosophy, political treatises, even scientific journals. She expressed opinions at dinner parties that made his business associates uncomfortable. She insisted on understanding the ranch operations in detail, riding out with the foreman to inspect the herds and asking questions that suggested she could run the business as well as any man. "You're too headstrong," her father had told her just that morning, his face turning the dangerous shade of red that preceded one of his rages. "You think you can run a ranch? You think you understand business better than men who've spent their entire lives learning it? You're a woman, Victoria. Your role is to marry well, manage a household, and provide heirs. That's all society asks of you, and it's not too much to expect." The argument had escalated until Victoria, unable to bear another moment of her father's tyranny, had stormed out and demanded that the stable hands saddle Tempest for a ride to the northern pastures. Her father, still fuming, had agreed, perhaps hoping that a few hours of cold wind and hard riding would knock some sense into her stubborn head. Now, as the winter sun began its descent toward the western peaks, Victoria found herself near the canyon territories, wrapped in a thick wool coat lined with fox fur, her blonde hair tucked beneath a wide-brimmed hat. She rode her favorite mare, a spirited gray named Tempest, who had been her 16th birthday present. Around her rode 4 of the ranch's most experienced men. Dutch, a grizzled former cavalry scout whose weathered face told stories of decades spent in this harsh land. Marcus, a freed slave who had proven himself the best horseman in the territory, and 2 younger hands, Billy and James, both eager to prove their worth. Dutch had been trying to convince her to turn back for the past hour. "Miss Victoria, the light's fading fast and this close to the high country." He paused, clearly uncomfortable with voicing his concerns. "Well, ma'am, there's been reports of Apache activity in these parts. Not that I want to alarm you, but your father would have my hide if anything happened to you." Victoria knew he was right. The sensible thing would be to turn Tempest's head toward home and return to the ranch house before full darkness fell. But something about the stark beauty of the winter landscape held her captive, refusing to let her go. The way the fading sunlight struck the snow-covered peaks, painting them in shades of rose and gold, the profound silence broken only by the wind sighing through the pines and the occasional harsh cry of a raven, the sense of vast emptiness that somehow felt more honest than the crowded parlors of Santa Fe society. Out here she could breathe. Out here she could be herself instead of playing the role of dutiful daughter and eligible maiden. Out here she felt truly alive in a way that frightened and exhilarated her in equal measure. "Just a few more minutes," she said softly, her blue eyes drinking in the beauty of the landscape. "It's so beautiful up here, so peaceful." The word peaceful had barely left her lips when they heard it, the distant thunder of hooves, the sharp cries of men, the unmistakable sounds of chaos erupting in the valley below them. "The herd!" Marcus shouted, his hand moving instinctively to the rifle strapped to his saddle. "Someone's scattering the herd!" Dutch pulled his own rifle free, his experienced eyes scanning the terrain below. "Apache raiders! Miss Victoria, you need to ride back to the ranch house right now. We'll handle this!" But before Victoria could respond, Tempest reared as gunfire cracked through the cold air like breaking ice. The mare's eyes rolled white with fear, and suddenly Victoria was fighting for control as the horse bolted toward the chaos instead of away from it. The ranch hands spurred their own mounts forward, shouting for her to turn back, but their voices were lost in the wind and the thunder of hooves and the sharp reports of gunfire. Victoria should have been terrified. Every instinct should have been screaming at her to wheel Tempest around and race for safety. But some reckless, wild part of her spirit that had always refused to be contained by the narrow expectations of society, drove her forward instead. The scene that unfolded before her eyes was unlike anything she had witnessed in her privileged, protected life. Apache warriors moved like shadows given form, their coordination and precision turning what should have been chaos into something almost beautiful. They drove the cattle toward the mountain passes with expert horsemanship that made her father's hired hands look like clumsy children. The ranch's armed guards fired wildly, more likely to hit each other than their intended targets, their panic obvious even from a distance. And then, through the swirling snow and gun smoke, Victoria saw him. He sat astride a magnificent paint horse, black and white markings stark against the white landscape. Even from a distance, everything about him radiated command and confidence. The way he sat his horse as though he and the animal were one creature, the way he directed his warriors with small gestures that they obeyed instantly, the way he seemed to be part of the wild landscape itself, rather than merely existing within it. Their eyes met across the chaos of the battlefield. Time seemed to slow, the world narrowing until there was nothing but those dark eyes locked with hers. Victoria had never believed in moments of instant recognition, in the romantic notion that two souls could know each other at first glance. She had read about such things in novels and dismissed them as pure fantasy, the inventions of writers who had never experienced real attraction. Yet, as those obsidian eyes found hers across the snow and smoke, she felt something fundamental shift inside her chest, as though her heart had been waiting her entire life for this precise moment. As though some part of her she hadn't known existed, suddenly recognized its other half. The Apache warrior's eyes widened slightly, and even from this distance, Victoria saw something flash across his face. Surprise, recognition, something that looked almost like wonder. Then his expression shifted, became focused and intent, and he kicked his horse into motion. He was coming directly toward her. Panic flooded through Victoria's veins like ice water, breaking the strange spell that had held her frozen. She wheeled Tempest around and urged the mare into a full gallop, racing across the uneven, snow-covered terrain, with her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. Behind her she could hear the thunder of hooves pursuing her, could sense him closing the distance with terrifying speed. The snow was treacherous, hiding patches of ice and uneven ground beneath its pristine surface. Tempest's hooves slipped on a frozen stream, hidden beneath the powder, and Victoria felt herself falling. She hit the snow hard, the impact driving the air from her lungs and sending stars dancing across her vision. Her rifle had flown from its scabbard and landed a few feet away, and she scrambled toward it desperately, her gloved fingers clumsy with cold and fear. She had almost reached the weapon when a shadow fell over her. Nahale dismounted with a grace that seemed impossible for a man of his size and strength. He moved with the speed of a striking snake, kicking the rifle away before she could grasp it, then using his weight to press her back against the snow. His hands closed around her shoulders, firm but not cruel, holding her in place but not hurting her, as he pinned her beneath him. Victoria struggled, her breath coming in sharp gasps that had nothing to do with exertion. She was acutely aware of every point where their bodies touched, of the weight of him above her, of the way his long black hair fell forward to create a curtain that shut out the rest of the world. This close, she could see every detail of his face, the strong line of his jaw, the high cheekbones that spoke of his heritage, the proud angle of his nose, the way his dark eyes held depths she could spend a lifetime exploring. He was beautiful. The thought came unbidden, shocking her with its intensity. Not handsome in the conventional way of the men who courted her in Santa Fe, but beautiful in the way that wild things are beautiful, fierce and untamed and utterly magnificent. They stared at each other, both breathing hard, their breath mingling in small clouds in the cold air between them. Snow fell gently around them, settling on her golden hair, catching in his dark lashes, creating a moment of impossible intimacy in the middle of chaos. The sounds of the raid seemed distant now, muted, as though the entire world had narrowed to just the two of them, locked in this breathless moment. Nahale stared down at the woman beneath him and felt his entire world tilt on its axis. She was beautiful, more beautiful than the sunrise over the sacred mountains, more beautiful than anything he had ever imagined. Her eyes were the color of summer sky, wide with fear and defiance and something else, something that called to him on a level deeper than thought or reason. Her hair was like spun gold, escaping from beneath her hat to frame a face that seemed to belong to another world entirely, a world of softness and luxury that should have been utterly foreign to him. But it wasn't her physical beauty that struck him like a blow to the chest. It was the fire he saw in her eyes, the spirit that refused to be extinguished even in her obvious fear. It was the way she met his gaze without looking away, without crying or begging, without surrendering her dignity, even though she was completely at his mercy. In that moment, Nahale knew with the absolute certainty that sometimes comes only once in a lifetime that his world had just changed forever, that this woman, this golden-haired creature who should be his enemy, was somehow, impossibly, his destiny. The realization terrified him more than any battle ever had. He could feel her heart racing beneath his hands, could see the rapid flutter of her pulse at the base of her throat. Her lips were slightly parted as she struggled to catch her breath, and Nahale found himself wondering what they would taste like, what sounds she would make if he released her abruptly and stood, stepping back quickly as though she had burned him. The loss of contact felt like a physical wound, but he forced himself to maintain distance, to remember who he was and what he was doing here. Victoria scrambled to her feet, her eyes never leaving his face. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other, the space between them charged with something neither could name, something that felt more dangerous than bullets or blades. Then Victoria turned and ran. Nahale let her go. He made no move to pursue her further, though every instinct screamed at him to follow, to capture, to claim what some primal part of him recognized as his. He stood in the snow and watched her flee, her figure growing smaller as she raced toward the distant ranch buildings, her golden hair streaming behind her like a banner. Cheese appeared beside him, his scarred face creased with concern. "Brother, are you hurt? Did she injure you?" "No," Nahale said quietly, his eyes still fixed on the horizon where she had disappeared. "But I will never be the same. We should go. We have what we came for, and the white men's guns are getting closer." Nahale nodded slowly, but as he mounted his horse and led his warriors back into the mountains with 200 head of cattle, one thought repeated in his mind like a heartbeat. She would be his. Not through force, not through capture, but through something far more powerful, something that terrified him more than any enemy ever had. She would be his because she was meant to be his, because in that moment when their eyes met, he had seen his entire future written in the depths of her blue gaze. The Apache did not believe in the white man's concept of fate. They believed in freedom, in choice, in the power of the individual will to shape one's own path. But Nahale could not deny what he had felt when he looked into her eyes, when he had held her in the snow, and felt her heart racing against his palm. She was his destiny, and he would wait, for days, for months, for years if necessary, for the moment when she realized it too. Victoria barely remembered the ride back to the ranch house. Dutch and the others had eventually found her, their faces creased with worry and relief that she was unharmed. They had lost nearly 200 head of cattle to the Apache raid, but miraculously, no one had been killed or seriously injured. The raiders had vanished into the mountains like smoke, leaving nothing but tracks that the falling snow would soon erase. Her father was absolutely furious when she arrived back at the ranch house, her clothes disheveled and her face pale. He paced the grand parlor like a caged animal, his face purple with rage as he ranted about savages and lawlessness and the incompetence of the territorial governor who refused to send more troops to deal with the Apache problem. "This is exactly why I didn't want you riding out to the northern pastures," he thundered, his fist coming down on the mahogany desk hard enough to make the crystal decanters jump. Those savages could have killed you, or worse. Do you have any idea what they do to white women they capture?" Victoria sat in a chair by the fireplace, wrapped in a blanket one of the servants had brought her, and said nothing. She could still feel the weight of the Apache warrior's hands on her shoulders, could still see the intensity in his dark eyes as he stared down at her. Her heart hadn't stopped racing since the moment he had released her and stepped back. What frightened her most was not that he had captured her, but that in that breathless moment before he let her go, some traitorous part of her hadn't wanted him to. "Victoria, are you even listening to me?" She looked up to find her father staring at her with exasperation and something that might have been concern if Thomas Ashford was capable of such an emotion. "I'm sorry, Father. What did you say?" "I said that I'm hiring more guns. Professional men from Texas who know how to deal with these Apache raiders, men who won't hesitate to do what needs to be done." His eyes narrowed. "And you, young lady, will not be riding out to the northern pastures again. Is that absolutely clear?" Victoria nodded mechanically, but his words barely registered. Her mind was elsewhere, lost in the memory of dark eyes and strong hands and a moment of connection that defied all logic and reason. That night she lay in her four-poster bed beneath silk sheets and hand-stitched quilts, staring at the ornate plaster ceiling, utterly unable to sleep. She kept seeing his face, kept feeling the strange electricity that had passed between them. It was madness. He was Apache, her people's enemy, a savage raider who had just stolen her father's cattle. By all rights, she should be terrified of him, should be grateful that he had let her go unharmed, should never want to see him again. Instead, all she could think about was what might have happened if that moment had lasted just a little longer. 3 weeks passed, and Victoria found herself slowly going mad. The winter deepened, bringing storms that made travel treacherous and confined most people to their homes. Victoria had always enjoyed winter, the quiet beauty of fresh snow, the cozy comfort of fires and hot chocolate, the excuse to curl up with a good book for hours. But this year she felt restless and irritable, snapping at the servants for minor infractions, arguing with her father about everything and nothing, unable to concentrate on even her favorite novels for more than a few minutes. She told herself it was simply cabin fever, the natural result of being confined to the house during the worst of the winter weather. She refused to acknowledge the truth, that she was watching the horizon constantly, searching for something she couldn't name, hoping for something she didn't dare admit even to herself. Her father had indeed hired more guns, just as he'd promised. Hard-faced men arrived from Texas and Arizona, men who wore their pistols low on their hips and spoke in quiet, dangerous tones. They patrolled the ranch boundaries with grim efficiency, set traps in the mountain passes, and spoke casually about killing Apache as though they were discussing the extermination of vermin. Victoria found their presence deeply disturbing. She had been raised to view the Apache as dangerous savages, barely human in their violence and their refusal to accept the benefits of civilization. But she had looked into the eyes of their leader, and what she had seen there was not savagery. It was intelligence, pride, honor, and something else, something that had called to a part of her she hadn't known existed. When the weather finally cleared after a particularly brutal storm, Victoria could stand the confinement no longer. She rose before dawn, dressed in her warmest riding clothes, and slipped out of the house before any of the servants could question her intentions. She saddled Tempest herself and rode out into the pearl-grey morning, following a trail that led toward the high country. She told herself she was simply enjoying the freedom of the open land, breathing fresh air after weeks of confinement. She refused to admit that she was searching for him. The sun had climbed higher in the sky when she reached a clearing surrounded by tall pines, their branches heavy with snow. The clearing was pristine, unmarked except for the delicate tracks of deer and rabbits. Victoria dismounted and walked to the edge of the trees, breathing in the cold, clean air and feeling something loosen in her chest for the first time in weeks. "You should not be here alone." Victoria spun around so quickly she nearly lost her footing, her heart leaping into her throat with a force that made her dizzy. He stood at the edge of the tree line, as still and silent as the pines themselves, looking like something conjured from her fevered dreams. He wore buckskin and fur against the cold, his long black hair loose around his shoulders, falling past his shoulder blades in a dark curtain that caught the morning light. In the clear winter sunshine, he looked like something from a myth, too beautiful to be real, too wild to exist in her civilized world. Victoria's first instinct was to run, to leap onto Tempest's back and race toward the safety of the ranch, but her feet remained rooted to the spot, and her eyes refused to look away from his face. "I could say the same to you," she said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded despite the way her heart was hammering against her ribs. "This is Ashford land." Something that might have been amusement flickered across his features, softening the hard planes of his face. "This land belonged to my people long before any Ashford walked upon it. We do not recognize your fences or your claims written on paper." He moved closer with steps so silent she couldn't hear them, even in the perfect stillness of the clearing. Victoria's hand moved instinctively toward the small pistol she carried in her coat pocket, but she didn't draw it. Some instinct told her that the weapon would be useless anyway. He could cross the distance between them and disarm her before she could even pull the trigger. "Are you going to kill me?" she asked, hating the way her voice trembled on the last word. Nahale stopped a few feet away from her, near enough that she could see the way the cold had brought a flush to his bronze skin, the golden flecks in his dark eyes that she hadn't noticed during their first encounter, the fine lines at the corners of those eyes that suggested he laughed more than his serious expression would indicate. "If I wanted you dead, you would not have left that battlefield alive 3 weeks ago," he said quietly, his voice deeper than she remembered, with a roughness that sent shivers down her spine that had nothing to do with the cold. "I did not come here to harm you." "Then why did you come?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications neither wanted to examine too closely. Nahale's eyes never left her face, and Victoria felt heat rise in her cheeks despite the frigid temperature. "I have been watching the horizon every day since our first meeting," he said finally, his voice low and intense in a way that made her breath catch. "Hoping to see you ride out, hoping for another chance to see your face. When I saw you leave your ranch this morning, I followed. I should not have. It goes against everything I know to be wise. But I could not stop myself." Victoria's breath caught in her throat, shocked by the raw honesty in his words. No man had ever spoken to her with such directness, such vulnerability. The men who courted her in Santa Fe hid behind flowery compliments and practiced manners, never revealing anything real beneath the polished surface. "You've been watching me," she whispered. "Yes." No shame, no apology, no attempt to soften the admission. Simply truth, offered without pretense. "Why?" Nahale took another step closer, close enough now that she could smell pine smoke and leather and something else, something wild and clean that she couldn't identify. "Because from the moment I looked into your eyes, you have haunted me," he said, each word deliberate and weighted with meaning. "Because I see your face when I close my eyes at night. Because I have never believed in the white man's God, or in destiny written in the stars, but when I held you in the snow, I knew that you were meant to be part of my life. That meeting you changed something fundamental inside me that can never be changed back." Victoria felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, overwhelmed by emotions she had no name for. She should have been frightened. She should have been outraged at his presumption. Instead, she felt something deep within her recognize the truth of his words, felt her own soul reaching toward his like a flower turning toward the sun. "This is impossible," she said, her voice breaking on the words. "You know this is impossible. We can't. There's no way that we—" "I know," Nahale said softly. "My father would kill you if he knew you were this close to me. His hired guns are looking for any excuse to hunt your people. I know. Your people and mine are at war. Have been for generations. There are hundreds of years of blood and hatred between us." "I know. Then why are we standing here talking as though any of this could be real, as though there could be any kind of future for—" She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Nahale reached out slowly, giving her every opportunity to move away, to reject his touch. When she didn't, when she stood frozen, barely breathing, her eyes locked on his, he touched her face with a gentleness that made her want to weep. His fingers were rough and warm against her cold cheek, calloused from years of hard living, yet his touch was infinitely tender. "Because some things are stronger than war," he said softly, his thumb stroking along her cheekbone with exquisite care. "Stronger than hatred, stronger than all the very logical reasons this should not be. Because I looked into your eyes and saw my future, and now I cannot unsee it, cannot go back to who I was before I knew you existed." Victoria closed her eyes, leaning into his touch despite every rational thought screaming at her to run. When she opened them again, she found him watching her with an expression that made her heart ache with its intensity, a mixture of longing and tenderness, and something that looked almost like pain. "I don't even know your name," she whispered. "Nahale. It means one who runs swiftly. And you are Victoria. I heard your men call for you during the raid." "Nahale," she repeated, tasting the unfamiliar syllables, finding them beautiful in a way she couldn't articulate. "We shouldn't be here together. This is dangerous for both of us." "Yes, we should not. I should go back before someone realizes I'm gone." "Yes, you should." But neither of them moved. They stood in the clearing while the sun climbed higher in the sky, the winter light streaming through the pines to paint patterns of shadow and gold across the snow. The world seemed to have contracted to just the two of them, to this moment suspended outside of time and consequence. "Will I see you again?" Victoria asked, hating how desperate the question sounded, how much she needed him to say yes. Nahale's thumb stroked along her cheekbone one last time before his hand fell away, though she could see in his eyes how much it cost him to break contact. "Do you want to?" "I don't know what I want," Victoria admitted, her voice raw with honesty. "All I know is that I haven't been able to stop thinking about you since that day, that I've been searching for you without even admitting it to myself, that standing here with you feels more real, more right, than anything else in my entire life. And that terrifies me more than anything ever has." "Then we are the same," Nahale said, and the warmth in his voice, the understanding, made her chest tighten with emotion. "Because you have become the center of my world, and I do not know if that is a blessing or a curse. I think perhaps it is both." "Both," Victoria whispered, managing a trembling smile. "I think you're right. It's definitely both." Nahale smiled then, a real smile that transformed his face completely, softening the hard edges, making him look younger and somehow even more devastatingly beautiful. "You are probably right about that." They talked until the sun climbed high in the sky, standing in that clearing as though they had all the time in the world. Victoria learned that Nahale had never wanted to be a warrior, that as a boy he had dreamed of being a healer, studying the plants and animals of the mountains with his grandmother, who knew the old medicine ways. But war had chosen him. His father had been killed by soldiers when Nahale was 16, and the responsibility of protecting his people had fallen to him because there was no one else who could bear it. She told him about her mother, who had died when Victoria was 12, leaving her alone in a house full of men who expected her to be decorative and silent. She told him about the books she read in secret, the dreams she had of a life beyond the narrow confines of what society allowed for women, the constant feeling that she was living in a cage even though the bars were made of silk and gold. "You're like a wild horse," Nahale said, studying her face with an intensity that made her feel completely exposed. "Beautiful and spirited, but trapped in a pen that is far too small for your spirit. You were meant to run free." Victoria laughed, though it came out sounding more like a sob. "That's exactly what I am, a wild horse in a gilded stable." "Wild horses are meant to run free," he said softly, "to feel the wind in their manes and the earth beneath their hooves. To choose their own path instead of having it chosen for them." "And what about you?" Victoria asked, searching his face. "Are you free?" Nahale's expression grew distant, his eyes focusing on something beyond the clearing. "I am free in ways your people will never understand, but I am also bound by responsibility, by the weight of lives that depend on my decisions. True freedom. I do not know if such a thing exists for anyone. We are all bound by something: duty, love, honor, survival." When Victoria finally mounted Tempest to return to the ranch, Nahale caught her hand, his fingers warm despite the cold. "Will you meet me here again?" he asked, looking up at her with an expression that was both vulnerable and hopeful. "Tomorrow, when the sun is at its highest point?" Victoria knew she should say no. She knew that every moment she spent with him was a betrayal of her father, her people, everything she had been raised to believe. But when she looked into his eyes, all of those considerations seemed distant and unimportant, drowned out by something far more powerful. "Yes," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'll be here." His smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. He pressed her gloved hand to his lips, a gesture so unexpected and tender that it brought fresh tears to her eyes. and then released her. Victoria rode back to the ranch in a daze, her mind spinning with everything that had happened. She was falling in love with a man who should be her enemy. She was risking everything for stolen moments in a clearing where no one could see them, and she couldn't bring herself to care about the danger, about the impossibility, about any of it. For the first time in her life, she was choosing her own path, and that path led straight to Nahale. Over the next 2 weeks, Victoria and Nahale met in secret almost every day, each time in a different location to avoid detection. Sometimes they met in the clearing where they had first talked, sometimes in a hidden canyon, where a hot spring created a pocket of warmth even in the depths of winter. Once beside a frozen waterfall that sparkled like diamonds in the winter sun, the ice formation so beautiful they took her breath away. They talked about everything and nothing. Nahale taught her words in his language, laughing at her pronunciation, but never mocking her efforts. She shared passages from her favorite books, watching his face as he listened with complete attention, asking questions that showed he understood not just the words, but the ideas beneath them. They learned each other's stories with a hunger that spoke of souls long starved for true connection. Victoria told him about growing up surrounded by wealth, but feeling utterly alone, about the constant pressure to be something she wasn't, about the dreams she had abandoned because she'd been told they were impossible for someone like her. Nahale shared stories of his childhood in the mountains, of learning to track deer with his father, of the grandmother who had taught him about plants and healing, of the moment when everything changed and he had to become a warrior instead of following his own dreams. The attraction between them grew stronger with each meeting, crackling in the air between them like lightning before a storm. It was there in every glance that lasted just a moment too long, in every accidental touch that sent electricity racing through their veins, in every moment of loaded silence when their eyes met, and neither could look away. But Nahale never pushed, never demanded more than she was ready to give. He treated her with a respect and tenderness that made her fall deeper in love with him every day, every hour, every moment they spent together. One afternoon, as they sat together beside a small fire Nahale had built to ward off the brutal cold, Victoria noticed scars on his hands, old wounds that had healed into white lines against his bronze skin. "How did you get these?" she asked, tracing one of the scars with her fingertip, marveling at how such a simple touch could make her heart race. Nahale looked down at their joined hands, his thumb stroking absently across her knuckles. "Many winters ago, when I was young and foolish, perhaps 14 or 15, I fought a mountain lion that had been stalking our camp, threatening the children. I won, but barely. These scars remind me that courage and stupidity are often the same thing, separated only by the outcome." Victoria smiled despite herself. "You're not stupid. Brave, reckless perhaps, but not stupid." "No?" He raised an eyebrow, a hint of humor in his dark eyes. "Then what would you call a man who risks everything, his safety, his people's safety, his very life, to meet with a woman he can never truly have, a woman whose world and his can never exist together?" The words hung heavy between them, dragging them both back to the reality they had been avoiding. Victoria's smile faded as the impossibility of their situation crashed back over her like a wave. "Nahale, what are we doing?" she asked softly, her voice thick with unshed tears. "Where can this possibly lead? We're living in a dream, but eventually we have to wake up." He turned to face her fully, his eyes intense in the firelight, his hands coming up to cup her face with infinite tenderness. "I do not know where this leads," he admitted, his voice rough with emotion. "I know only that when I am with you I feel whole in a way I never have before, that you make me want to believe in a future where our peoples are not enemies, where love is enough to bridge any divide, where we could build something together instead of being torn apart by forces beyond our control." "But love isn't enough," Victoria said, tears streaming down her cheeks now, no longer able to hold them back. "It's not enough in this world, Nahale. My father would never accept you. Your people would never accept me. The laws, the hatred, the centuries of bloodshed between our peoples, how can love possibly be stronger than all of that?" Nahale's thumbs brushed away her tears with exquisite gentleness, his touch reverent, as though she were something precious and fragile that might break if handled roughly. "Then perhaps we must create our own world," he said softly. "A world that has room for both of us, where the old hatreds do not reach." "How? Where could we possibly go?" "I do not have all the answers," he admitted, and she could hear the frustration and pain in his voice, the knowledge that he was supposed to be a leader who solved problems but couldn't solve this one. But I know that I would rather die free with you than live without you. If you asked me to leave my people, to walk away from everything I have ever known, I would do it, Victoria. For you, I would do anything. Go anywhere. Become anyone. Victoria felt her heart crack open at his words, at the raw honesty and vulnerability in them. I can't ask that of you, she whispered. Your people need you. You're their leader, their protector. I can't be the reason you abandon them. You do not have to ask, Nahale said, his forehead coming to rest against hers, their breath mingling in the small space between them. I offer it freely, with my whole heart, because a man cannot lead when his heart is torn in two. Because I would become hollow without you, broken, and a broken man is no good to anyone. She kissed him then, unable to hold back any longer, pouring into that kiss everything she felt but couldn't put into words. It was her first kiss, and it was perfect, tender and passionate, desperate and gentle, full of promise and heartbreak in equal measure. Nahale responded with a hunger that matched her own, his arms coming around her to pull her close, to eliminate any space between them. He kissed her like a man dying of thirst who had finally found water, like she was the air he needed to breathe, like she was everything he had ever wanted and never thought he could have. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Victoria felt as though her entire body was on fire despite the winter cold. She had never imagined that a kiss could be like this, could make her feel like she was floating and burning and drowning all at the same time, could make her want things she had no name for, need things she had never allowed herself to consider. Goodness gracious, she breathed, her eyes wide with wonder, her fingers pressed to her lips as though she could capture the feeling of his mouth on hers and hold it forever. Nahale laughed, the sound rich and warm and full of masculine satisfaction. Is that a good thing? I don't know, Victoria admitted honestly, her heart still racing, her entire body trembling with reaction. I've never felt anything like that before. It's intense, almost frightening in its power. His expression sobered, becoming serious and tender. But do you want more? She looked into his eyes and saw her own desire reflected back at her, saw the restraint it was costing him to hold back to let her set the pace. Yes, she whispered, the word coming from somewhere deep inside her, from a part of herself she was only just discovering. I want more. I want everything. He kissed her again, deeper this time, and Victoria surrendered to the feeling completely. In his arms the impossible seemed possible. In his arms she could believe that love might actually be strong enough. In his arms she was finally, completely, utterly free. The idyll could not last forever. Victoria had known that from the beginning, but she had allowed herself to believe that somehow they might have more time, that they could exist in their stolen moments indefinitely. She had been so careful, or so she thought. She varied the times of her rides, never stayed away too long, always returned with plausible stories about where she had been exploring or what she had been doing. But she had underestimated two things: her father's network of informants and the suspicions of the hired guns who watched the ranch boundaries with predatory patience. One of them, a lean, cruel-faced man named Pike who had the cold eyes of a rattlesnake, had followed her to one of her meetings with Nahale. He had watched from a concealed position as they kissed, as they held each other with desperate tenderness, as they spoke words of love that would have been considered treason by both their peoples. Pike reported directly to Thomas Ashford, presenting his evidence with the barely concealed glee of a man who enjoyed other people's suffering. Victoria was in the stables, brushing Tempest and thinking about Nahale's promise to meet her the next day, when her father stormed in with Pike and 3 other hired guns behind him. The fury on Thomas Ashford's face made her blood run cold. "How could you?" he roared, his voice echoing through the stable, causing the horses to shift nervously in their stalls. "How could you betray your own people this way? How could you betray everything I've built, everything I've worked for, everything your mother and I sacrificed to give you this life?" Victoria's heart dropped into her stomach, but she kept her voice steady as she turned slowly to face her father. "I don't know what you mean, Father. Don't you dare lie to me." He grabbed her arm roughly, his fingers digging in hard enough to leave bruises that would last for days. "Pike saw you with that Apache savage, saw you kissing him like some common whore who sells herself in the back alleys of Santa Fe. Victoria wrenched her arm free, her own anger rising to match his, all the years of being controlled and dictated to suddenly boiling over. He's not a savage. His name is Nahale, and he's more of a gentleman, more of a decent human being than any man you've ever tried to force me to marry. Her father's hand cracked across her face with enough force to snap her head to the side and split her lip. Victoria tasted blood, but she refused to cry, refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing her pain or her fear. "You will never see him again," Thomas said, his voice shaking with rage so intense it seemed to radiate from him like heat. "You will stay in this house under guard until I can arrange a marriage that will salvage your reputation, if such a thing is even possible now. And as for your Apache lover," he turned to Pike, his eyes glittering with malice, "I want him dead. I want his entire band dead. I'm offering $5,000, cash, to the man who brings me his scalp as proof." "No!" Victoria lunged at her father, but the hired guns grabbed her arms, holding her back as she struggled against their grip. "Please, father, please don't do this. I'll do whatever you want. I'll marry whoever you choose. Just please don't hurt him. Please." Thomas looked at her with an expression of disgust so profound it was like a physical blow. "You're pathetic, degrading yourself for a savage. Your mother would be ashamed to see what you've become." He left her there, sobbing in the arms of the hired guns who dragged her roughly back to the main house and locked her in her room. Victoria threw herself against the door, screaming and pounding until her voice was raw and her hands were bruised, but it made no difference. The door was solid oak, the lock was new and strong, and no one was coming to help her. She had to warn Nahale. She had to find a way to tell him that her father had put a price on his head, that professional killers would be coming for him and his people. But the windows had been fitted with iron bars while she was in the stable. Her father must have planned this confrontation, and guards were stationed in the hallway to ensure she didn't escape. Victoria paced her room like a caged animal, her mind working frantically through possibility after possibility. She thought about climbing out the window despite the bars, about overpowering the guards despite the fact that they were armed and she wasn't, about setting fire to her own room as a distraction. But every plan seemed impossible, and with each passing hour her desperation grew more acute. The next day came and went in agonizing slowness. Nahale would have been waiting for her in their meeting place, would have wondered why she didn't come. Would he think she had abandoned him? Would he come closer to the ranch to try to find out what happened, walking straight into the trap her father had set? The thought of him being hunted, being killed, made Victoria physically ill. She couldn't eat the food the servants brought her, couldn't sleep despite her exhaustion. She simply paced and planned and prayed to any power that might be listening to keep him safe. On the third day of her imprisonment, salvation came from the most unexpected source. In the dead of night, when the house was silent and even the guards were fighting to stay awake, Victoria heard a soft tap at her window. She rushed to it, her heart leaping, and found Marcus outside, the freed slave who worked in the stables, who had always been kind to her, who had risked his own freedom and his life to climb up to her second-story window using a rope. "Miss Victoria," he whispered urgently, his dark face creased with worry and determination. "I can't get you out. Too many guards, and these bars are solid iron. But I can get a message to him if you tell me where to find him." Victoria almost wept with relief and gratitude. With shaking hands, she quickly wrote a note on paper torn from one of her books, explaining everything. Her father's rage, the bounty on Nahale's head, the hired killers who would be searching for him and his people. She begged him to run, to take his band and disappear deeper into the mountains where her father's men couldn't follow, where he would be safe. "Thank you," she told Marcus, pressing the note into his weathered hands, tears streaming down her face. "You're risking everything to do this. If my father finds out—" Marcus smiled sadly, and there was understanding and compassion in his eyes. "I know what it's like to love someone the world says you can't have, Miss Victoria. I had a wife once before I was freed, but her master sold her south and I never saw her again. If I can help you keep your love alive, then maybe some good comes from my loss." True to his word, Marcus rode out before dawn and found Nahale's camp through a combination of tracking skills and careful questions asked in the right places. He delivered Victoria's note and then rode back before anyone at the ranch noticed his absence. Nahale read Victoria's words with a growing sense of fury and helplessness that threatened to consume him. She was a prisoner in her own home. Her father had put a substantial bounty on his head. Professional killers were coming with the express purpose of murdering him and everyone he protected. His warriors gathered around him, their faces grim as he shared the contents of the letter. "We must run," Chi said immediately, his scarred face set with determination. "Take the band deeper into the mountains where the white men cannot follow, where the terrain itself will be our protection. It is the logical choice, brother, the only choice that keeps our people alive." The other warriors murmured agreement, already beginning to discuss the best routes, the best hiding places, the best strategies for disappearing into country they knew better than anyone else alive. But Nahale stood silent, staring at Victoria's handwriting, at the tear stains that had smudged some of the ink, at the desperate plea for him to save himself. And he knew, with absolute certainty, that he could not do what logic demanded. "I am going to get her," he announced, his voice cutting through the discussion like a blade. The warriors fell silent, staring at him as though he had lost his mind. "Brother," Chase said carefully, approaching him slowly as one might approach a wounded animal, "that is madness, pure madness. They will be expecting you to try exactly this. It will be a trap with you as the prey, and they will kill you before you get within 100 yards of that ranch house." "Then I will spring the trap and take her anyway," Nahale said calmly, though his hands were clenched into fists at his sides. "You will die." Chase grabbed his shoulders, his eyes desperate. "You will die, and for what? For a woman you cannot have? For a love that has no future? What happens to our people when you're dead, brother? What happens to all those who depend on you, who trust you, who need you to keep them alive?" The question hung in the air, heavy with the weight of responsibility and sacrifice. Nahale was silent for a long moment, feeling the pull of duty warring with the demands of his heart. He had given his life to his people, had sacrificed everything for their survival and their freedom. But Victoria was more than just the woman he loved. She was his heart, his soul, his reason for drawing breath. "I have given my life to our people," he said finally, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside him. "I have sacrificed everything for their survival, my youth, my dreams, my own desires. But Victoria is my heart, and a man cannot live without his heart. If I abandon her now, if I leave her trapped and suffering because of her love for me, I will become something hollow, something broken, and a broken man is no good to anyone, least of all to those who depend on him." He looked around at his warriors, at the faces of men who had followed him through impossible situations, who had trusted his judgment even when it seemed insane. "I am not ordering any of you to come with me. This is my choice, my risk to take. But I am asking, if any of you believe in love, if any of you understand what it means to find the other half of your soul, help me bring her home." For a moment, no one spoke. The silence stretched, taut as a bowstring, and Nahale prepared himself for the reality that he might be making this rescue attempt alone. Then Chi stepped forward, a reluctant smile crossing his scarred face. "You are an idiot," he said bluntly, "a complete and utter fool. But you are my brother, and I will not let you die alone. I will help you." One by one, the others stepped forward as well. Not all of them. Some had wives and children, responsibilities they couldn't abandon for what was almost certainly a suicide mission. But 8 men, including Chase, pledged themselves to Nahale's cause, ready to risk everything for his love. Together, they began to plan the impossible. The rescue came on a moonless night 5 days later, when the darkness was thick enough to hide even the shadow of a bird's wing. Nahale and his warriors approached the Ashford ranch with the stealth and patience that had made the Apache both feared and respected throughout the territory. They moved like ghosts, avoiding the guards, studying the house's layout, looking for weaknesses in what should have been an impenetrable defense. Marcus had provided crucial information about which room Victoria was being held in, about the number of guards and their patrol patterns, about the best approaches and the most likely escape routes. Even with all of this intelligence, the mission was nearly impossible, but Nahale had faced impossible odds before. He scaled the wall to Victoria's window alone, his heart pounding with more than just exertion. When he tapped softly on the glass, he saw her face appear in the darkness, and even through the window and the bars, he could see the joy and relief that flooded through her transforming her features from despair to radiant hope in an instant. She tried to speak, but he pressed a finger to his lips, signaling silence. Guards were nearby, and any sound could bring them running. "Stand back," he whispered, his voice barely audible even in the profound silence of the night. He used his knife to work at the bars, carefully prying at the mortar that held them in place. It was old mortar, weakened by years of weather and temperature changes, but the work still required agonizing patience. Every scrape of metal on stone seemed deafeningly loud. Every moment that passed was a moment when guards could come, when someone could raise an alarm, when everything could go catastrophically wrong. 15 minutes passed. 20. Sweat ran down Nahale's back despite the cold, his muscles screaming from the awkward position and the constant strain. But finally, blessedly, the bars came free. Nahale slipped through the window and found himself immediately engulfed in Victoria's arms. She clung to him, shaking with emotion, tears streaming down her face and soaking into his buckskin shirt. "I thought I'd never see you again," she sobbed against his chest, her voice muffled to keep from alerting the guards. "I thought my father would kill you, that I'd be trapped here forever, that everything we had would be just a dream I'd remember while living a nightmare. I told you I would destroy worlds to keep you," he whispered into her hair, breathing in her scent, feeling whole for the first time since he'd read her desperate letter. "Did you think I was speaking metaphorically?" Victoria laughed through her tears, a sound of pure joy. "You came for me. You actually came for me." "Always," he promised, pulling back just enough to look into her eyes. "I will always come for you. Now we have to move quickly and quietly. Can you do that?" She nodded, her face set with determination despite her fear. Nahale helped her through the window and down the rope he had secured, his hands steady despite the terror of knowing that at any moment their luck could run out. His warriors were waiting below, keeping watch in the shadows, their eyes constantly scanning for threats. When Victoria's feet touched the ground, Nahale took her hand and they began to move swiftly and silently toward the edge of the property. They had almost reached the tree line, almost reached the point where they could disappear into the darkness, when someone shouted behind them, "There, they're escaping! Sound the alarm!" Gunfire cracked through the night like thunder, and suddenly the entire ranch was erupting into chaos. Lamps were lit in windows. Men were running and shouting, horses were being saddled, dogs were barking. The carefully planned stealth operation had just become a desperate race for survival. "Go!" Nahale shouted to his warriors. "Get to the horses! Get her to safety!" But Victoria refused to leave his side, her hand gripping his with desperate strength. They ran together through the darkness, bullets whining past their ears like angry hornets, men shouting behind them, the sounds of pursuit growing louder and closer with every passing second. Nahale's horse was waiting at the pre-arranged meeting point, and he swung Victoria up in front of him before spurring the animal into a full gallop. Behind them, he could hear the thunder of hooves as the ranch hands gave chase, but Nahale knew this country in ways they never could. He led his warriors through narrow passes barely wide enough for a single horse, across frozen streams that would hide their tracks, through terrain that would make following them nearly impossible in the darkness. They rode through the night without stopping, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and the ranch. The pursuit followed for a while but eventually fell away, the ranch hands unwilling to risk their lives in the treacherous mountain passes at night. By the time the sun rose, painting the snow-covered peaks in shades of rose and gold, they had reached Nahale's camp high in the mountains. Victoria was exhausted, her hands raw from gripping the horse, her body aching from the desperate ride and the terror of the escape. But she was free. She was with Nahale, and nothing else mattered. The other members of the band greeted them with a mixture of relief and uncertainty. Victoria saw the way they looked at her, not with hostility exactly, but with wariness. She was the daughter of their enemy, a woman from the people who were trying to destroy them. Her presence in their camp was a complication that could bring danger to them all. But Nahale faced them with quiet authority, his arm around Victoria's shoulders, in a gesture that was both protective and claiming. "This is Victoria," he said simply, his voice carrying to every member of the band. "She is under my protection. She has left her world behind for me, has risked everything for our love. Anyone who wishes to challenge that, anyone who questions my decision, may speak now." No one spoke. The silence stretched, but it was a thoughtful silence rather than a hostile one. Finally, Chase stepped forward and offered Victoria a slight bow, his scarred face softening with something that looked like respect. "You are welcome here," he said in careful English. "Any woman brave enough to risk everything for love deserves our respect and our protection. You are one of us now." Victoria felt tears prick her eyes again. She seemed to cry so easily now, all her carefully constructed walls crumbling in the face of real emotion. "Thank you," she whispered. Nahale led her to his dwelling, a shelter built against the mountain stone, warm and surprisingly comfortable despite its simplicity. He built up the fire until heat filled the space, then wrapped her in furs and checked her carefully for injuries. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his hands gentle as they moved over her, searching for wounds, for damage. "Just bruises," she assured him, though her lip was still swollen where her father had struck her, and her arms bore the marks of the hired gun's rough handling. "Nothing serious. Nothing that won't heal." He touched her split lip carefully, his jaw tightening with suppressed rage at this evidence of her father's violence. "I should kill him for striking you, for daring to put his hands on you in anger." "No," Victoria said firmly, catching his hand and holding it against her cheek. "Enough blood has been shed over me, and I don't want you to become a killer for my sake. I just want to be here with you. I want to figure out how we can build a life together." Nahale pulled her close and they sat before the fire, holding each other as though they would never let go, as though they could somehow fuse into one being if they just held on tightly enough. "What happens now?" Victoria asked softly, her voice muffled against his chest. "I do not know," Nahale admitted, his hand stroking her hair with absent tenderness. "Your father will not stop searching for you. He will bring the full force of his wealth and influence to bear, will hire every gun in the territory if necessary. And my people—" He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "They accepted you tonight because I gave them no choice, because they trust my judgment. But they are worried, Victoria, worried that I am putting love before their safety, that your presence will draw your father's wrath down upon all of us." "Are you?" she asked quietly. "Putting love before their safety." He was silent for a long moment, his chest rising and falling beneath her cheek. "Perhaps," he admitted finally. "But I also believe, I have to believe, that there must be a way for us to survive together, a way for our peoples to find peace instead of endless war. Maybe we can be the beginning of that. Maybe our love can be the first step toward a different future." Victoria wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that their love could change the world, could somehow bridge the vast divide between their peoples. But she had seen the hatred in her father's eyes, had witnessed the casual cruelty of the hired guns, had heard the stories of massacres and broken treaties that went back generations. Still, as she sat in Nahale's arms, watching the fire dance and feeling safer than she had ever felt in her father's grand house, she allowed herself to hope. If love wasn't enough to change the world, perhaps it could at least create a small corner of it, where they could exist together. The winter deepened, but Victoria found that she didn't mind the brutal cold when she was with Nahale. Life in the Apache camp was harder than anything she had experienced in her pampered existence. There were no servants to bring her meals, no soft beds, no luxury of any kind. She learned to help with the cooking over open fires, to repair clothing with bone needles and sinew thread, to do all the tasks that she had once thought beneath her notice. The Apache women were initially deeply suspicious of her, and Victoria couldn't blame them. She was the daughter of a man who had stolen their land and killed their people. She represented everything they had reason to hate. But as they watched her willingness to work and learn, her refusal to complain about the harsh conditions, her genuine love for Nahale, they slowly began to soften toward her. An older woman named Desba, whose face was lined with decades of hard living, but whose eyes were kind, took Victoria under her wing. She taught her the Apache language with patient repetition, showed her their customs and their ways of surviving in this unforgiving land, shared stories of the old days before the white men came in overwhelming numbers. Nahale watched Victoria's transformation with a mixture of pride and love so intense it was almost painful. She was like a flower that had been confined in too small a pot, her roots bound and restricted. Now, finally given room to spread and grow, she was blooming into her true self. She laughed more, smiled more, seemed to shed the weight of expectations and restrictions that had burdened her entire life. But the threat from her father still loomed over them like a storm cloud on the horizon. Thomas Ashford had indeed increased the bounty on Nahale's head to an unprecedented sum and was offering an additional substantial reward for any information about Victoria's whereabouts. Hired guns and bounty hunters scoured the mountains with grim determination, making it increasingly dangerous for the Apache to move freely or to hunt in their traditional territories. One night, as Victoria lay in Nahale's arms in the warmth of their shelter, she asked the question that had been haunting her for weeks. Will we ever be able to stop running? Will there ever be a time when we're not constantly looking over our shoulders, waiting for my father's men to find us? Nahale stroked her hair thoughtfully, his fingers gentle against her scalp. Not while we remain in this territory, he said honestly. Your father's reach is too long, his desire for revenge too strong, his resources too vast. Eventually, he will find us. And when he does, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Then what do we do? Victoria asked, trying to keep the fear out of her voice. We leave, Nahale said simply, as though it were the most obvious thing in the world. We go north, into the territories where the white man's law does not yet reach with such long fingers, where we can build a life without constantly looking over our shoulders, without living in fear that every day might be our last. Victoria sat up, looking at him in the flickering firelight. What about your people? You're their leader, Nahale. They need you. They depend on you for their survival. I have spoken with the elders, Nahale said, his expression serious. Some will come with us, those who are weary of war, who long for a place where they can live in peace. Others will stay, will find their own path. Chais has agreed to lead those who remain. He is wise and strong, a better leader than I ever was. They will be safe under his protection. You would give up everything for me? The question came out barely above a whisper. Victoria. Nahale took her face in his hands, his eyes intense and filled with such love it took her breath away. You are not taking me away from my life. You are giving me a new one, a better one. With you I have hope for a future beyond endless war and constant struggle. With you I can imagine peace, can dream of children who grow up free from the terror that has defined my entire existence. You are not a burden or a sacrifice. You are my salvation. Tears streamed down Victoria's face and she couldn't speak past the emotion clogging her throat. Instead, she kissed him, pouring into that kiss everything she felt but couldn't put into words. Gratitude, love, devotion, hope. They made love that night for the first time, their passion tempered by tenderness, their need for each other overwhelming any hesitation or fear. Victoria had never known that such intimacy was possible, that two people could become so completely intertwined, body and soul. In Nahale's arms, she felt whole in a way she had never experienced before, as though she had been walking through life with a piece of herself missing and had finally found it. Afterward, as they lay tangled together beneath the firs, Nahale made her a promise that he would spend the rest of his life fulfilling. When we reach the northern territories, I will build you a house, he said, his voice soft in the darkness. Not grand like your father's mansion perhaps, but comfortable, safe, a place that is truly ours, where we can build a life together, and we will fill it with children and laughter and love until the walls themselves seem to glow with happiness. Victoria smiled against his chest, feeling more content than she had ever thought possible. Children? Many children, Nahale said with conviction, and she could hear the smile in his voice. Little ones with your golden hair and blue eyes, running wild through the mountains, learning both our languages, belonging to both our worlds. Or with your dark eyes and fierce spirit, Victoria countered, her fingers tracing patterns on his chest. Both, Nahale decided firmly. We will have both. Our children will be the bridge between two worlds, proof that love can create something new and beautiful from things that once seemed forever divided. They left 2 weeks later, as soon as the weather permitted safe travel. Nahale, Victoria, and 23 others who chose to follow them began the long journey north toward a territory that promised freedom and possibility. They traveled carefully, avoiding settlements and soldiers, moving through country that grew increasingly wild and beautiful with each passing day. The journey took them nearly 4 months, through spring's arrival and into early summer. They faced hardships, illness, injuries, dangerous river crossings, encounters with hostile groups who didn't appreciate strangers passing through their territory. But they also experienced moments of transcendent beauty, valleys filled with wildflowers, mountain peaks that seemed to touch the sky, forests so thick and green they felt like cathedrals. Victoria learned more during those months than she had in all her years of education in Santa Fe. She learned how to read the land, how to find water, how to identify plants that could heal or feed. She learned the rhythms of traveling with a band, the importance of community, the way that hardship shared created bonds stronger than blood. And through it all, Nahale was at her side, teaching her, protecting her, loving her with a constancy that never wavered no matter how difficult the circumstances became. They finally reached their destination in late summer, a valley in the far northern territories where the mountains rose like giants and the streams ran clear and cold and pure. It was remote enough that they could live in peace, yet fertile enough to support farming and hunting. The nearest white settlement was 3 days' ride away, too far for casual interference, but close enough for trade if they needed it. It was perfect. It was home. They built their dwelling together, log by log, stone by stone. It was simple but sturdy, with a good fireplace and windows that looked out over the valley. Victoria planted a garden that first autumn, coaxing vegetables from the rocky soil with determination and care. Nahale hunted and trapped, trading pelts with occasional trappers who passed through the area for supplies they couldn't make or find themselves. They were married in the Apache way when the first snow fell that winter, under the stars, with their friends bearing witness to their vows. Victoria wore a dress that Desba had helped her make, decorated with intricate beadwork that had taken months to complete. Nahale wore his finest buckskins, his long hair braided with eagle feathers and beads. When they spoke their vows, promising to honor and protect each other for all their days, to walk together through whatever the future brought, Victoria felt a joy so profound it seemed to radiate from her very soul. This was not the society wedding her father had planned for her, with hundreds of guests and elaborate decorations. This was something far more precious, a union of souls, witnessed by people who had become her true family, blessed by the mountains and the stars, and the love that had brought them all to this place. Their first year together was not without hardship. The isolation was difficult at times, the work endless, the winters brutal. Victoria sometimes missed the comforts of her old life, warm baths, soft beds, books to read whenever she wanted. But every night she fell asleep in Nahale's arms, and every morning she woke to his smile. That was worth more than all the luxury in the world. In the spring of their second year in the valley, Victoria discovered she was pregnant. The news filled Nahale with a joy he had never imagined possible. He became even more protective of her than usual, insisting she rest more, bringing her special foods he thought would be good for the baby, talking to her swelling belly as though the child could already hear him and understand his promises of love and protection. "You are going to be a wonderful father," Victoria told him one evening as they sat together, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple and gold. "I hope so," Nahale said, his hand resting on her belly, feeling their child moving beneath his palm. "I want to give our children everything: love, safety, the freedom to be whoever they choose to be. I want them to grow up, knowing both their heritages, proud of both their peoples, never having to choose between the two parts of themselves." "They'll have all of that," Victoria assured him, covering his hand with hers, "because they'll have you as their father. And they'll have a mother who will fight anyone who tries to tell them they don't belong." Their daughter was born in the early spring, during a gentle snowfall that reminded Victoria of the day she and Nahale had first met. The labor was long and difficult, attended by Desba and 2 other women who had birthed many children and knew the old ways. But when Victoria finally held her daughter in her arms, all the pain vanished, replaced by a love so fierce it was almost frightening in its intensity. The baby had Nahale's dark eyes and Victoria's golden hair, a perfect blend of both their worlds, just as they had imagined. They named her Ayana, which meant eternal blossom in Nahale's language. Holding his daughter for the first time, Nahale felt tears stream down his face, tears of joy, of gratitude, of wonder that something so perfect, so innocent, so beautiful could exist in a world that had often seemed filled with nothing but cruelty and pain. "She's perfect," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "She's ours," Victoria said, smiling through her own tears. "The first of many, if you meant what you said about filling our house with children. I meant every word, Nahale promised, pressing a kiss to her forehead and then to their daughter's tiny head. Our house will overflow with children and laughter and love. 2 years later, they had a son, strong and fierce like his father, with a laugh that could light up the darkest day. They named him Keeler, meaning sparrowhawk, and he lived up to his name with energy that seemed boundless. Their home filled with the sounds of children's laughter, with the warmth of family, with the kind of love that transforms everything it touches. Nahale taught his children to respect the land, to honor both their Apache heritage and their mother's English roots. Victoria taught them to read and write, sharing with them the books she had carefully preserved from her old life, opening up worlds of knowledge and imagination. The small community they had founded grew slowly but steadily. Others came, Apache fleeing the reservations, former slaves seeking freedom, white settlers who didn't fit into conventional society. What united them was a desire for peace, for acceptance, for a place where they could be themselves without judgment or persecution. Chase visited occasionally, bringing news of the band that remained in the South. They were surviving, adapting, finding ways to preserve their way of life, even as the world changed rapidly around them. He always left smiling, genuinely happy to see his friend so content, so at peace. On their 10th anniversary, as they sat together watching Ayana and Kele play in the meadow near their house with the younger children, they had 3 more now, 2 daughters and another son. Victoria rested her head on Nahale's shoulder. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked softly. "Giving up leadership? Leaving your people in the South? Everything you sacrificed to be with me?" Nahale was quiet for a moment, watching his children play, their laughter carrying on the summer breeze. "I gave up one kind of life to gain another," he said finally, his arm tightening around her shoulders. "I traded war for peace, loneliness for love, mere survival for truly living. How could I possibly regret that? But you were meant to be a great leader. You were born for it." "I'm leading," Nahale said, gesturing toward their children and the small community that had formed around them. "I'm leading them into a future where Apache and white can exist together in one family, in one heart, where love is stronger than hatred, where acceptance matters more than prejudice. That is greater leadership than anything I could have done through war." Victoria kissed him, tasting salt from the tears on both their faces. "I love you," she whispered against his lips. "I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "And I love you," Nahale promised, his hand cupping her face with the same tenderness he had shown the first time he touched her in that snowy clearing so many years ago. "Our love will live on in our children, and in their children, and in all the generations that follow. We started something here, Victoria, something that will last forever." As the sun set over the valley, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold, their children ran toward them, laughing and shouting about the birds they had seen, the flowers they had picked, the adventure they had created in their imaginations. Nahale caught Ayana and swung her into the air, while Victoria pulled Kele close, their other 3 children tumbling around them like puppies. They were a family, Apache and English, warrior and rancher's daughter, 2 people who should never have met but who had found in each other everything they had been missing. 3 more children came in the following years, 2 daughters and another son, each one unique, each one loved beyond measure. Their house rang with noise and life and love. Victoria taught all of them to read and appreciate books, to think critically, to question the world around them. Nahale taught them the skills to survive in the wilderness, to honor the land, to be strong and kind in equal measure. The children grew up speaking both English and Apache fluently, honoring both their heritages, belonging fully to neither world, and yet completely to both. They were the living proof that the divide between peoples could be bridged, that love could create something new and beautiful from things that had once seemed forever separate. When Ayana was 16, a young man from a family of trappers who lived 3 valleys over fell desperately in love with her. Nahale watched his daughter with the young man and saw echoes of himself and Victoria, that same impossible attraction, that same recognition of souls meant to be together. "She reminds me of you," he told Victoria, as they watched Ayana laugh at something the young man said, her face radiant with joy. "She has your fierce heart," Victoria replied, her hand finding his as naturally as breathing, "and your certainty when you know what you want." The young man asked for Ayana's hand in marriage, and Nahale gave his blessing, seeing in the boy's eyes the same devotion he himself felt for Victoria. They threw a celebration that brought together their diverse community: Apache families, former slaves, white settlers, trappers, traders, and several families from nearby territories. It was a mixing of cultures, a blending of worlds, exactly what their own union had begun 2 decades earlier. As Nahale watched his daughter marry, her face radiant with the same joy Victoria had shown on their own wedding day, he felt his wife's hand slip into his. "We did it," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "We proved that love can bridge any divide, can overcome any obstacle." "We proved more than that," Nahale said, his eyes never leaving his daughter's glowing face. "We proved that 2 people willing to risk everything for each other can change the world, one family at a time, one generation at a time." And they had. Their children and grandchildren spread across the territories, carrying with them the legacy of a love that had refused to be bound by hate or prejudice, or the cruel divisions that separated peoples. They became teachers and healers, leaders and peacemakers, people who understood that the world was richer for its diversity, that strength came from unity rather than division, that love was always worth fighting for. Nahale and Victoria grew old together in the house they had built with their own hands, their hair turning grey, their steps slowing, but their love never diminishing. If anything, it grew deeper and stronger with each passing year, rooted in shared memories and shared struggles, in the family they had created, in the community they had nurtured, in the legacy they would leave behind. On a spring morning when Victoria was 71 and Nahale was 76, they sat together on the porch of their home, expanded over the years to accommodate their growing family, watching their great-grandchildren play in the meadow where their own children had once run. "I've had a good life," Victoria said softly, her hand resting in Nahale's, their fingers intertwined as they had been for more than half a century. "The best life," Nahale agreed, his thumb stroking across her knuckles in a gesture that had become as natural as breathing. "Better than anything I could have imagined in those days, when I was just a warrior trying to keep his people alive." "I love you," she said, the words as true and powerful as they had been the first time she spoke them in that clearing so long ago. "And I love you," Nahale replied, bringing her hand to his lips in the same gesture he had made the first time they parted. "Always and forever." They sat in comfortable silence, hands intertwined, as the sun climbed higher in the sky. Around them their family, children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and the extended community that had formed around their original vision, carried on the legacy they had created, a legacy of love that had conquered hate, a legacy of hope that had defeated despair, a legacy that proved beyond any doubt that sometimes the heart knows exactly where it belongs from the very first glance. And for Nahale and Victoria, it had belonged together from that moment in the snow, when their eyes met across a battlefield and their souls recognized each other. One glance had been enough to change the course of their lives, to set in motion a love story that would echo through generations. They had started as enemies and become soulmates. They had risked everything and gained more than they ever imagined possible. They had proven that love, true, fierce, unwavering love, could indeed destroy worlds, and then build far better ones in their place. The end. Dear listener, there's a moment in this story that I can't stop thinking about. It's not the dramatic rescue or the passionate declarations of love. It's quieter than that, and somehow more powerful. It's when Victoria, raised in silk and luxury, learns to sew buckskin with trembling fingers. When she plants seeds in rocky soil, not knowing if anything will grow. When she speaks her first halting words in Apache, and the women finally smile at her. She was starting over at an age when the world told her life was already decided. And maybe that's why you're here tonight listening to love stories in the darkness. Maybe you understand what it feels like when life demands you become someone new, not because you want to, but because everything familiar has been taken away. The person you were doesn't fit anymore. The future you planned dissolved like morning mist. Here's what I need you to know. Starting over isn't failure. It's the bravest thing a human being can do. Victoria didn't just survive in that Apache camp. She discovered parts of herself that her father's mansion had kept hidden for decades. Strength she didn't know she possessed. Joy she'd never been allowed to feel. a wildness in her spirit that had been waiting, patient as stone, for permission to exist. You have that same wildness in you. I don't care what the mirror says about your age or what the world says about your possibilities. There is something untamed in your soul that refuses to be diminished by time or loss or disappointment. Maybe it's been quiet for so long you forgot it was there. Maybe life trained you to be small, to be convenient, to take up less space. Maybe you learned to apologize for wanting things, for feeling things, for being too much or not enough, but it's still there, waiting. And tonight, as you lay down to rest, I want you to make peace with something. You don't have to have it all figured out. Nahale and Victoria didn't have a plan when they rode north into unknown territory. They had love, yes, but they also had doubt and fear, and moments when they wondered if they'd made a terrible mistake. They built their life one small choice at a time. One log added to the house, one seed planted in the garden, one kind word to a neighbor who started as a stranger, one morning of waking up and choosing to try again. That's all any of us can do. That's all any of us have ever done. You've lived enough years to know that life doesn't give us the fairy tale ending in one magical moment. Real love, the kind that lasts, is built in 1,000 ordinary moments of choosing each other, choosing hope, choosing to believe that tomorrow might be gentler than today. And you've been doing that all along, haven't you? Every morning you've opened your eyes despite the grief. Every kindness you've offered when your own heart was breaking. Every time you found a reason to smile when the world gave you every reason to surrender. Every night you've whispered a prayer or a hope into the darkness, even when you weren't sure anyone was listening. That's your love story. Right there. Not the one you thought you'd have, maybe. Not the one you planned when you were young and the future seemed infinite. But a real one, a true one. A story of a soul that refused to let bitterness win, that chose softness in a hard world, that kept believing in beauty even when beauty seemed impossibly far away. Nahale told Victoria that their love would live on through their children and grandchildren. And it did. Generations carrying forward the truth that love is stronger than hate, that connection is stronger than division. But your love lives on too. In every person you've touched with your kindness, in every moment of grace you've offered to a world that didn't deserve it, in the quiet way you've shown others how to endure, how to hope, how to keep going when everything says to give up. You are someone's Nahale, someone's Victoria, the person who showed them that impossible things can happen, that hearts can heal, that it's never too late to choose love over fear. So tonight, as sleep finds you, release the burden of perfection, release the weight of regret, release the cruel voice that says you should have done more, been more, accomplished more. You are exactly who you were meant to be. Scarred, yes. Weathered by storms, absolutely. But also beautiful in ways that only depth and time can create. Beautiful in your resilience, beautiful in your tenderness, beautiful in your refusal to let life make you cruel. Close your eyes now, dear one. Let your body sink into rest. Let your mind release its grip on tomorrow's worries. You are safe, you are loved, you are enough. And when morning comes, and it will come, you'll rise again. Not because you have to, not because anyone is watching, but because that's what warriors do. That's what survivors do. That's what souls filled with quiet, stubborn, magnificent love do. Sleep deeply. Dream sweetly. Tomorrow can wait. Tonight is for rest. With all our gratitude. The Wild West Whispers team. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. We hope this story warmed your heart, stirred your soul, and reminded you that true love knows no boundaries, not of blood, culture, or time. If you enjoyed this tale, we invite you to subscribe, like, leave a comment, and share this video with someone who still believes in the power of love. From the bottom of our hearts, your support keeps Wild West Whispers alive and motivates us to keep telling stories full of emotion, redemption, and the kind of love that changes everything. And don't go just yet. At the end of this video, another breathtaking story will appear. Click it and be swept away by more unforgettable moments. Thank you for being here. The Wild West Whispers team.